We're making our way through First Kings. I'd like to finish First Kings today, but I don't know how the clock is going to behave itself. One of three endings could be. I could end right exactly at 9:45, the very slim chance. I could race through these things and we're going to have free time at the end, or I might not get that far. So we'll just have to wait to see. So in that regard, I'll just give you the quick synopsis and then we'll go through. You know, the old saying is tell them what they're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, and then maybe there's a chance to remember what they said, right? So chapter 20 is Israel is fighting with Syria, and Israel's going to win this battle. Unfortunately, Ahab has a problem with disobedience. Chapter 21 is almost like this parenthesis. It steps away from the battles and it talks about this vineyard that's right next door to Ahab's palace. And after Naboth gets done in, Elijah shows up and he says, by the way, you're going to die. Then chapter 22, another battle. Syria finally loses. And I'm sorry, Syria wins, but Ahab dies, and that's the end of First Kings. The themes, God's sovereignty. If you study the book of Daniel will tell you that God will put into power whoever he wants to be in power. Prophetic truth, whether it's coming from Elijah, we're going to also see some unnamed prophets. The consequences of sin, we'll tie that right together with mercy after repentance. What we're going to see here is Ahab, who was the worst of the northern kings, comes to repentance. We'll fast forward and we'll see that Manasseh, who was the worst of the southern kings, also comes to repentance. And the message there is there's opportunity for everybody. So, Ahab's wars with Syria. And there you see a map. Ben-Hadad, the word Ben-Hadad simply means the son of Hadad, and Hadad was one of their gods. And so whether that was actually his name or his title, like a Pharaoh title or an Abimelech title, Ben-Hadad. So Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, gathered all his army together. 32 kings were with him. Now, what we're going to see as we go through the next few chapters, he's going to replace the 32 kings because they lost the battle with them with real commanders. And the notion of royalty leading the army was with us all the way up until World War I. In World War I, what happened was the Brits would put their royals in charge of the armies. And unfortunately, in World War I, they still followed Civil War and Napoleonic tactics. And so royalty is the wrong word, I should say nobility. The nobility would lead the charge out of the trenches, the nobles would die. And between that and the combination of higher taxes to pay for the war is what happened to Britain and how the nobility just sort of fell apart. But at any rate, Ben-Hadad, 2,800 years earlier, Ben-Hadad had his 32 kings and they're marching on Syria. And there you see a map. And what you see on the west side will be an axis of God's people. We're going to see an alliance between the north and the south. And on the east side, you're going to see the build of the Assyrian Empire. And again, I'll do a fast forward. When the northern kingdoms finally fall, those people are going to be dispersed. And I have a verse there from 2 Kings, and I have a map as far away as Media. Now, I'm not talking about Delaware County. I'm talking about all the way out by the Caspian Sea. So there was quite an axis of power being built on the east, and so 32 kings worth already developing. On the west, you see here Ahab, and what happened was Ahab gave his daughter Athaliah to marry the daughter of the southern kingdom. Jehoshaphat's son was Jehoram, and so those two got married. And again, from 2 Chronicles, you see that they created a political alliance through the wedding. Ben-Hadad and Ahab dialogue. Ben-Hadad's words will be in black, and Ahab's words will be in red. You're surrounded, and I want your best wives and your children. I wonder if he said best wives because he didn't want Jezebel. I don't know. Ahab says, no problem. Ben-Hadad says, I want everything else too. Now look at that above line. I want your silver. I want your gold. I want your women. I want your kids. What's left? His idols. And he says, no way. Ben-Hadad says, I've got you surrounded. It loosely translated, if every one of my soldiers came in and took a handful of dirt, there wouldn't be enough dirt to fill a handful for each one of my soldiers. I've got you surrounded. You're in deep trouble. And again, loosely translated, Ahab says back to him, you're going to die. When Ben-Hadad heard this message as he was drinking with the kings in the booths, we're going to find that he wasn't just drinking, he was drunk, and that leads to his loss. When Ben-Hadad heard this message as he was drinking with the kings, who were supposedly the commanders in the tents, they said to his men, take your positions, and they took their positions. Don't know if the kings did that. They were too busy carousing. And now God's going to enter into the conversation. So far it's been Ben-Hadad and it's been Ahab. Now God's going to say through the prophet, notice an unnamed prophet. Notice Elijah is not in this dialogue. Elijah said, I'm the only one that's left. And the message was, I've got 7,000 that are still faithful, and this is one of them. A prophet came to Ahab and he said, thus saith the Lord, have you seen all this great multitude? Have you seen this army? Behold, I'm going to give them into your hands, and then you'll know that I am the Lord. Unfortunately, he was a slow learner, and he didn't learn that day that God was the Lord, but he'll learn before the hour's up. And Ahab says, oh yeah, how's this going to happen? And the prophet says, the servants are going to go out. And then Ahab says, who's going to kick off the game? Who's going to start the battle? And the prophet says, you are. And so the servants they mustered an army of a grand total of 7,232 guys against this vast army, siege warfare. The walls of Samaria are surrounded. They open the gates, and these 7,200 guys walk out against 33 drunks and whoever else is capable of fighting. And they went out at noon while Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk in the tents, he and the 32 kings. And the servants went out first, and Ben-Hadad said, one of the messengers said, hey, they've opened the gates and people are coming out. And the drunk man says, take them not dead or alive, DOA, but take them alive or alive. If they come for peace, take them alive. If they come for war, take them alive. But what happens? The 72 guys went out, and each one killed one of the scouts that were coming out to take them alive. So the Syrians fled, and Israel pursued them. And now Ahab decides to come out from the walls, and he, leading the 7,200, strikes down many, many people. Unlike Napoleon, when he was younger, he would lead the charge. It wasn't until his older age that he decided to take a position back behind. That was Ahab. He took the position back behind. We're going to find that Ahab was not quite a man. The Bible uses the words vexed and sullen. Get ready for round two. Round one, they pushed the Syrians back. Here comes round two. Then the prophet came near to the king and said to him, get yourself all ready because they're coming back. And the servants of the king of Syria said, their gods are gods of the hills. Keep in mind, these polygamists, polytheists, people that worship multiple gods, thought these gods were local gods. And so the battle at the first round was in Samaria. It was in the hills. And so the Syrians are saying, their gods are the gods of the hills. If we fight them on the plain, we'll win. We have them outnumbered. We've got all the right tools. Let's fight them in the plain. And do this. Remove the kings and put real commanders in place. And muster an army just like the other one everything, chariot for chariot, horse for horse, man for man, but leave the other 32 kings at home. And in the spring, Ben-Hadad mustered the Syrians, and they went to Aphek, a place of strength, a place of the plains, to fight against Israel. So there, chapter 20, verse 1 was Samaria, and that's where the Syrians lost. Here, chapter 20, verse 26, is where the Syrians are going to lose again. Ahab 2, Ben-Hadad 0. The next chapter is going to be Naboth's vineyard. I said it was like a parenthesis in the story. And then in chapter 22, they come to this place called Ramoth Gilead, and that's where the Syrians win, but Ahab dies. He won battles, but he lost the war. And the people of Israel were mustered. This is now the second fight up there in Aphek. And the people of Israel were mustered and were provisioned and went against them. And the people of Israel encamped before them like two little goats. Anybody ever heard of the 101st Airborne Division? What's their logo? It's the Screaming Eagles. Can you imagine if their logo was two little goats? Not quite the same effect. So there in the picture is Ben-Hadad and all of his armies and his commanders, and they're sitting there, and basically these guys are coming out like a couple of goats ready to graze. But what happens? A man of God came near and said to Ahab, "Thus saith the Lord," because the Syrians said, "Their God is a God of hills and ours is a God of valleys. You're going to win this battle too. And again, you shall know that I am the Lord." But not this day either. And they encamped against one another for 7 days. And on the seventh day, the battle began, and Israel struck 100,000 guys. And in their retreat, another 27,000 got killed when the wall of the city fell on top of them. Another great city, another great victory. And Ben-Hadad is back up in Damascus. And Ben-Hadad also fled and entered into an inner room in the city. And the servant said, "Behold, now we have heard that the kings of the house of Israel, merciful kings, let's put sackcloth and ashes on, and let's tie a noose around our neck and say, 'Have mercy on us.'" So that's what they did. They put on sackcloth, put a noose around their necks, and they sent the message. Ben-Hadad says, "Please let me live." Ahab says, "He's alive? He's my brother." Now, Ben-Hadad's messengers were looking for a sign, and the sign was Ahab saying, "He's my brother." And so they went back and they reported that. Ahab says, "Bring him here." Ben-Hadad came out, and Ben-Hadad says, "The cities that my father took, I'm going to give back your real estate. And what's really interesting is I'm going to let you have trade routes into Damascus and the other Syria and the other cities. We can be buddies again. After all, you called me your brother." Ahab said, "Okay, I'll let you go on these terms." Unlike Ulysses S. Grant, unconditional surrender, we'll have peace under these terms. He gets some real estate, he gets a trade agreement, but now a prophet might be the same one, might be a different one, no name. And a certain man of the sons of the prophets said to the fellow at the command of the Lord, "Strike me, please." But the man refused to strike him. Imagine me coming up to somebody and say, "Pull your sword out and take a slice." You don't know if it's from the Lord. And I'd like to think you'd spare me. But anyhow, thanks. But anyway, he decides he's not going to hit the prophet. Then the prophet said, "Because you've not obeyed the voice of the Lord, as soon as you leave, a lion's going to come and eat you up." He found another guy and said, "Strike me, please." And he said, "No problem." And he hits him. So now he puts a bandage over his face and he's going to go visit Ahab. And he goes and visits Ahab. And as the king passes, he cries to the king. He says, "Hey, your servant went out in the midst of the battle. And behold, a soldier turned and told me," he said, "Protect this guy. He's your prisoner. And if he's missing, you're going to die." Very similar to the Romans 8 centuries later. If they lost a prisoner, they were going to die. And as your servant was busy here and there, he was gone. So Ahab said, so shall your judgment be. You yourself have decided it. Keep in mind, he's talking to a prophet. Then he hurried to take the bandage away from his eyes, and the king of Israel recognized him as one of the prophets, and he said to him, thus saith the Lord, because you have let go out of your hand the man whom I've devoted to destruction, Ben-Hadad, therefore your life shall be for his life, and your people for his people. So here's the first time Ahab hears he's going to die, and he hears that he's going to lose his kingdom. He's going to lose his people. And the king of Israel went to his house, vexed and sullen, and came to Syria. So chapter 20 ends. Ahab regains some territory. He picks up a trade deal. He's sentenced to death. He's still married to Jezebel. I don't know which of those two was worse, to be sentenced to death or to still be married to Jezebel. And Ahab still hasn't come to know the Lord. Keep in mind, and we'll see it in print, the worst of all the northern kings. That brings us to chapter 21, Naboth and his vineyard. Now, Naboth means fruitful, and he was right there at the valley of Jezreel, which means sown of God. So here's this vineyard sown of God. That doesn't mean God planted, it means that God arranged for this thing to happen. Naboth, a fruitful guy, think fruit of the Spirit, think a guy still faithful to the Lord. And we know that he's still faithful to the Lord because Ahab is going to ask him to give him his vineyard, and Naboth says it's forbidden. Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Jezreel, beside the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. Ahab says, give me your vineyard that I may have a vegetable garden in it. Now, I don't know about growing a vineyard. I've never tried it, but the ones that I've seen around here take a lot of investment. You got to plant the thing and grow the thing and cables and this and that. And so here's Ahab. He's going to say, I'm going to rip all that stuff out, and he's going to plant veggies. So right off the bat, I don't think Naboth is in the right frame of mind. He says, and I'll give you a better vineyard for it. Or if it seems good, yeah, I'll just give you cash. Naboth says, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. All the way back to Leviticus, all the way back to Moses. They weren't supposed to sell off the land. And Ahab went into his house once again, vexed and sullen, because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said to him. And he lay down on his bed, and he turned away his face and would eat no food. Sounds like one of my kids in their younger days who were going on a hunger strike. Enter Jezebel. Jezebel, his wife, comes to him and says, why are you so vexed and sullen? Because I spoke to Naboth and he won't give me the vineyard. Jezebel says, aren't you the king? Arise, eat. Wake up. I'll get you the vineyard. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name. Is that the first auto pen? We don't know. But she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his auto pen. And she sent the letters to the elders and the leaders who lived in Naboth in his city. And she wrote in the letters, proclaim a fast. And set Naboth at the head of the table. I don't understand why he would be at the head of the table if there's a fast. I don't understand. And two worthless guys come up and they set up some false accusations. So they set the thing up. The letters were written. They had the fast. Naboth was at the head of the table, and the two guys show up and they say, Naboth cursed God and the king. So they took him outside the city and they stoned him to death with stones. Well, where's outside the city? Jezreel, sown of God. So then they said to Jezebel, Naboth is gone. He's dead. So are you happy now, Ahab? As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and dead, she said to Ahab, arise, take over the vineyard, which he refused to give you because Naboth is not alive, but he's dead. So, okay, get out of bed, get something to eat, go visit my new vineyard. As soon as Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, he arose to go down to the vineyard to take possession of it. And who shows up? Keep in mind, the guy on the left is not supposed to be wearing yellow robes. He's supposed to be in camel skin. That's supposed to be Elijah. You could see him from afar off just from the clothes he wears. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Arise, go down and meet King Ahab, who is in Samaria, and behold, he's in the vineyard. And say to him, thus saith the Lord, have you killed and also taken possession? In the place where the dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, shall the dogs lick your own blood. And we're going to see as we go through the rest of 1 Kings and the 2 Kings that that's going to happen. Not just to Ahab in the battle, but it's going to happen to Jezebel. And we're going to see that Elijah's forecasting that as well. So Ahab doesn't say anything about the dogs or the death or anything else. He says, you found me. Yeah, I found you because you've sold yourself to do what is evil in the sight of the Lord. Behold, I will bring disaster upon you. I will utterly burn you up and will cut off Abraham from every male, bond or free in Israel. You're going to die, and everybody that's got your last name is going to die too. And I will make the house just like we studied the history. Here are two other regimes where everybody in the regime was killed off. Why? Because you have made Israel to sin. And of Jezebel, the Lord said, the dog shall eat her within the walls of Jezreel. And everyone that belongs to Ahab, they're going to die, and the birds are going to eat them up. And oh, by the way, have a nice day. Elijah leaves. There was none who sold himself to do what is evil in the sight of the Lord like Ahab, whom Jezebel, his wife, incited. He acted abominably in going over idols as the Amorites had done, and whom the Lord cast out before the people of Israel. So this is now sinking in. You're going to die. Your wife's going to die. All of your kids are going to die. And he heard these words, and he tore his clothes, and he went about dejectedly. And the word of the Lord came once again to Elijah. Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring disaster in his days, but in his son's days, and I will bring disaster upon his house. I mentioned in the opening comments that there were the two worst kings. The northern king was Ahab, the southern king was Manasseh. In both cases, both guys repented. And in both cases, instead of it hitting Ahab's family to lose the kingdom, his kids were going to lose the kingdom. And in Manasseh's case, instead of Manasseh losing the kingdom, his kids, grandkids, were going to be losing the kingdom as well. And once again, a couple of other thoughts. First of all, everybody has an opportunity to be saved. But then second of all, every one of us has to face the consequences of sin. And that's what's happening here. Ahab repented, but he still had to face the consequences of sin. And that brings us to chapter 22. For 3 years, they had peace, which means for 3 years, Ahab got to enjoy his vineyard and think about what Elijah said. But in the 3rd year, Jehoshaphat, early slide, he's the king of the south. He had made a political alliance by having his son marry Ahab's daughter. Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. Now he went north, but again in Bible times, they always said go down from Jerusalem. So he went down to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel said to his servants, do you know that Ramoth Gilead belongs to us? In other words, here's this piece of real estate. He got some of the real estate back from Ben-Hadad, but he didn't get all of the real estate. And he's thinking, maybe I should have struck a better deal. There's another city that I didn't get. So, Jehoshaphat, since you happen to be in town, let's go get that other city as well. Why should we keep quiet for 3 more years and let the other king have it? He said to Jehoshaphat, will you go with me? Jehoshaphat said, I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. You know, the Bible tells us that they weren't supposed to trust in horses or chariots, but to trust in God, and he left that part out. Jehoshaphat honored Jehovah. Ahab didn't. And we're going to see how that plays out. And Jehoshaphat said to the king, before we go, inquire first of the Lord. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, 400. Remember, Elijah killed off 450. Now they've amassed another 400. And he said, should I go out to battle? And they said, sure, go ahead. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king. But Jehoshaphat said, is there not another prophet of Yahweh? Notice Lord in the uppercase. Is there not a prophet of Yahweh of whom we can inquire? And the king of Israel said, there's one guy here, but he never brings me good news. Jehoshaphat says, don't let the king say such a thing. And then the king of Israel summoned an officer and said, bring quickly Micaiah, who is like Jehovah. Now, there are two names that are very, very, very similar. I'm bringing this up for your sake. Michael means who is like Elohim, who is like God. Micaiah is who is like Jehovah. That's why it's A-H at the end instead of E-L. Okay. Who is like Jehovah, the son of the replenisher? In other words, he's replenishing the prophecy of the Lord as opposed to these 400 guys. Now, the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, were sitting on their thrones, arrayed in their robes, and at the threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria. And all the prophets were prophesying before him. So here are the two kings. Here are 400 guys carrying on. And here's one of them, Zedekiah, the justice of the Lord. He's going to give him some justice. Zedekiah made for himself a pair of horns. Thus saith, with these you shall push the Samaritans until they are destroyed. Well, that's not going to happen. And all the prophets prophesied so and said, go ahead, the Lord will give it into the hand of the king. You see that phrase now twice. And the messenger who went on to summon Micaiah said to him, behold, the words of the prophets with one accord are saying this, so we want you to say the same thing. Micaiah says, I can't do that. Now, there's somebody else in the Bible who said, I can't do that. That was Balaam. Balaam was hired by the king Balak, who said, I want you to watch the children of Israel as they're marching through my land, and I want you to curse them. Balaam said, I can't curse them. I can just tell you what the Lord says. And so the first time they go, he blesses them. Balak says, well, maybe you didn't hear me right. Went to another spot. He said, now when they come by, I want you to bless them. Comes the second time, curses them again. But what Balaam did was, he said to them, I can't curse them, but I can tell you how to subvert them. Get their men to intermarry with your women, and we'll pull them all to false gods. Now, this guy, Micaiah, depending on how you read this and depending on the influx of your voice, you could say he was a Balaam at first, or then he woke up, but I don't think that's the way it is. What he's going to do is he's going to recite the same words as the false prophets, but he's going to say it with such a tone of voice like, yeah, right, you're going to go down there and you're going to win the battle. So when he came to the king said to him, now, Micaiah, shall we go to battle or should we refrain? Micaiah says, go up and triumph. The Lord will give it into the hand of the king. That's how I view it. Somebody else might say, well, he sold out. Somebody else might say, well, he was really prophesying because he didn't say which king. But then we're going to see what happens. The king said to him, how many times have you given me nothing but bad news, and now you're going to give me good news? Tell me what the Lord said. And Micaiah says, verse 17, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said, they have no master. Let each return to his home in peace. So all of the soldiers, they get to go home. But Ahab, not so much. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, see, didn't I tell you that he would not prophesy good? That gives us a heavenly scene similar to Job chapter 1. If you remember the story of Job, there was Job who loved the Lord and hated evil, and Satan goes up to God and says, is he serving you for nothing? Just let me tinker with this guy and watch him curse you. So there was a dialogue going on in heaven. We're going to see something similar to that right here. Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing and one said another. Now you could look at this and say, well, God is conspiring with evil. There is evil in this world. Keep in mind, the evil that occurred to Job occurred at the permission of God. There's a little interesting dialogue for that to unfold, but it was at the permission of God. So, why does somebody have terminal cancer? Why was this young person's life snuffed out? It's all because of the curse of sin, and it's all in the full knowledge of God. And just like little kids, I would ask the question, why? And I don't have an answer. So that's what's happening here. So the Lord said, this is an can't even talk anymore. An anthropomorphism, making God look like a man so we can relate to the story. He says, who's going to go down there? Then a spirit came forward and said to the Lord, I'll entice him. And the Lord said, how are you going to pull that off? And he said, I'll go out and by a lying spirit through the mouths of his prophets. And he said, go ahead, you'll succeed. Now, therefore, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these your prophets. Did the Lord make those guys lie? James tells us that God doesn't tempt anybody. It was his permissive will that allowed that to happen. So now Micah gives the message that he would have given up front. Then Zedekiah the son, he's the guy with the horns, came near, and he strikes Micah on the cheek, and he says, how did the Spirit of the Lord go from me to speak to you? And Micah said, behold, you shall see on that day when you go into an inner chamber to hide yourself. And he goes, we'll get to his story after a bit. And the king of Israel said, seize Micah and take him back to Amon, the governor of the city, and to Joash, king's son, and say, thus saith the king, put this man in prison and feed him bread and water until I come in peace. Lock him up. Micah said, if you do come back, then I didn't tell you the truth. And he said, hear, all you people. That word here is the Hebrew word shema, which means in King James talk, that's hearken. And in our talk, I say, and the NIV used it, mark my words. If you come back, then I wasn't speaking of the Lord. For the day is coming when people will not endure sound teaching. We're taking what we just had with Ahab. Micah tells Ahab, this is going to happen. He didn't want to hear it. We have that today. People will come itching ears, and they'll only want to listen to the people that they hear what they want them to say, and they'll turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into falsehoods. You know, I'm a big fan of looking up people's names and what they mean. I'm a big fan of looking at these pictures. Look at that picture. They painted that picture with that guy wearing spectacles, and they weren't even invented till the 13th century. Ahab is killed in battle. Now, when we get into this story, we're going to find the battle is going on. Ahab is going to try to fight the word of the Lord by putting on just captain's clothes as opposed to king's clothing. Jehoshaphat's wearing his king's clothing. Everybody goes after Jehoshaphat. He screams. They realize they're going after the wrong guy. And then the Bible says that somebody took and drew an arrow at random and kills Ahab. Now, the Jewish tradition is that it was Naaman, the leper, who was a general. I don't think it was Naaman. The reason I don't think it was Naaman was somebody who is responsible with firearms. That was a firearm. Doesn't just shoot haphazardly. Some archer decided to pull the arrow and just let it fly. So Ahab is killed in battle. Then Zedekiah, the guy with the horns, we just went through that. So they go up to Ramoth Gilead. And Ahab says, I'm going to disguise myself, but you wear your robes. And they went out. Syria, they had 32 commanders and not the kings. And he says, don't fight with anybody. I'm just interested in Ahab. And when the commanders of the chariot saw Jehoshaphat, they cried, it is surely the king of Israel. So they turned to fight against him, and Jehoshaphat cried out. Keep in mind, they didn't know there were two different armies, the north and the south. They saw one army. They saw one king. The Ben-Hadad said, just go after this one guy. So that's what they did. And Jehoshaphat cried out. Now, the Chronicles gives us a little bit more detail. It says he cried out, and the Lord helped him. And God drew them away from him. And when the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back. But a certain man drew his bow at random. There's a battle going on. There are Israelis there. There are Syrians there. Who knows where that arrow is going to hit? So the king died and was brought to Samaria. And they buried the king in Samaria, and they washed the chariot. Keep in mind what Elijah said about the dogs and Naboth's vineyard. They take the chariot over towards the vineyard, even though the picture shows something that looks like the Parthenon. And they washed the chariot by the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood, and the prostitutes washed themselves in it. Now, that's pretty disgusting. But think about how strange these people were to wash themselves in the blood of a dead king. So Ahab says to the driver, turn away and carry me out of here. And at sunset, just like Elijah said, every man to his country, just like sheep without a shepherd, everybody went back to their home in peace. And the king died. So back to this picture. There you see Ahab. Ahab is dead. And Jehoshaphat is now a shift over to his side, over to the southern side. Now we're going to take a look at the Jehoshaphat scorecard because we're running out of time here. Good news and bad news. He was a good king, but he didn't do everything right. He was doing what was right in the sight of the Lord. You see that phrase several times attached to southern kings, but never attached to a northern king. The bad news was that he left some of the high places in place. That's where they would worship the Asherah and the Baal. The good news was that he wiped out all the male prostitutes. Bad news was he made a peace alliance with Ben-Hadad. There was no king in Edom. A deputy was the king. So basically, it was just being run by the underlings. And what's going to happen is Jehoshaphat, because he has an access down to Eilat, that's the port at the very top of the Red Sea, because he has access, he's going to go down and build a navy because he wants to go down farther down, and he wants to get some gold. But what happens is his ships get wrecked right in the port. They never got to leave the harbor. And I borrowed this phrase, the notion in the second half of verse 19, they made shipwreck of their faith. Jehoshaphat had faith in God, but he made shipwreck because he was making an alliance with Syria. He had plenty of gold and silver. He decided he was going to go have himself some more. So I don't know if you can see that. That's a map. You see Israel up above. You see the little slice of the Red Sea. In the very bottom, that town is now called Elat. And he wanted to go from Elat down to Ophir to get some gold that's mined there.